Something was screaming inside the walls of Vareth Castle, and it wasn't the storm. Rain hammered the stained glass windows in sheets, each gust rattling the ancient frames like fists demanding entry. Thunder rolled over the black stone towers, and beneath it, threading through the corridors like a second heartbeat, was a sound the castle hadn't heard in 400 years. Fear. Not from the humans locked in the dungeons far below. Not from the enemies who whispered Lucian Draven's name like a curse in the dark. It was coming from his own guards. Gareth stood outside the king's private chamber. One hand braced flat against the door and did not move. He had served 3 kings in his 4 centuries of life. He had watched empires rise from nothing and collapse into ash. He had never once, not a single time, stood in Lucian's way. He was about to now. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. Lucian Draven did not walk like a man. He walked like something the dark had built on purpose. Unhurried because nothing had ever dared make him rush. Adrian trailed 2 steps behind him, silent, his hand resting near the hilt of his blade out of instinct rather than need. No one in this castle needed a blade around Lucian. Lucian was the blade. The king rounded the corner and stopped. Gareth was standing in front of his door. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain lashed the narrow window at the end of the hall. Somewhere far below, in the depths of the castle, something that might have been a woman's voice cried out in her sleep. Thin, broken, terrified. "Move," Lucian said. Gareth did not move. "Leave her alone," he said instead. The corridor went utterly, dangerously silent. Adrian's breath caught. In 400 years, no servant had spoken to the vampire king like that. No guard had ever placed his body between Lucian and anything he wanted. Men who defied Lucian Draven did not live long enough to regret it, and Gareth knew that better than anyone in this castle. He had personally buried 3 who tried. Lucian's crimson eyes settled on the old guard's face, searching for madness, for treason, for some explanation that would make this forgivable. He found only certainty. "You forget who you are speaking to," Lucian said, and his voice had dropped into the register that made grown men fall to their knees. "I remember exactly who I'm speaking to," Gareth answered, not stepping aside. "And I remember what happens to helpless women when powerful men decide they belong to them." Something flickered behind Lucian's eyes. Not anger. Something colder, quieter, far more dangerous. Something that had not moved in centuries. He pushed past Gareth anyway. The door swung open beneath his hand, and whatever Lucian had expected, a spy dragged in from the storm, an assassin's accomplice sweating out a confession before dawn, it was not this. The chamber smelled of melted wax and rain-soaked wool. Hundreds of candles burned low around the enormous bed, their light catching on crimson velvet and the pale, bruised curve of a woman's face. 2 hooded guards stood motionless near the stained glass window, where a full moon hung behind fractured glass like something watching. Evelyn lay across the bed, blonde hair spilling over the pillows, one cheek darkened by a bruise that hadn't finished healing. Her black dress was torn at the shoulder, and even unconscious, even broken with exhaustion. One arm was locked tight around something hidden beneath the blanket, as though her body had made a decision her mind no longer had the strength to argue with. Lucian had ruled this kingdom for 400 years without hesitating over anything. He hesitated now. He remembered her, fighting to stay conscious the night Gareth carried her through the gates, whispering the same 4 words over and over until her voice gave out. "They are looking for the baby." He hadn't understood it then. He reached toward her bruised cheek, and Gareth's voice cut through the silence again, lower this time, almost pleading. "Leave her alone." Lucian didn't answer. His gaze had already dropped to the blanket, to the small, deliberate shape curled against her chest that was not a pillow, was not a fold of fabric, was not anything he could explain away. His hand found the edge of the blanket. Gareth took 1 step forward. "My king." Lucian pulled it back. A newborn lay sleeping against Evelyn's heart, one tiny fist curled into the collar of her dress. For a moment, the child simply breathed, small and unbothered, utterly unaware of the storm outside, or the king kneeling over him. Then his eyes opened. They were not the soft, unfocused eyes of an ordinary infant. They burned, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably crimson. the exact crimson that had run through every Draven king for 1,000 years. The exact crimson Lucian saw every time he looked in a mirror. The candles in the chamber guttered, all at once, as if the room itself had flinched. Lucian Draven, who had watched kingdoms burn without changing expression, who had ordered executions with less feeling than most men chose their meals, went completely, utterly still. "No," he whispered. It was the first time in 4 centuries anyone in that castle had heard fear in his voice. Evelyn's eyes snapped open. She saw him first, the king, kneeling over her son, the blanket pulled back, his hand still hovering near the child's face. And something ancient and animal took over before conscious thought ever caught up. Her whole body curled around the baby in a single violent motion, shoulders turning, arms locking, putting herself between Lucian Draven and the only thing left in the world she had not already lost. "Please," she breathed, voice cracked and raw. "Don't let them take him." Lucian didn't move. He didn't speak. He only stared at the child in her arms, at what he was only now beginning to understand was his child, and felt 400 years of carefully built silence come apart in the space of a single held breath. Behind him, Gareth said nothing at all. He had known this moment was coming since the night he found her bleeding on the forest road. He had simply never imagined it would be the king who broke first. Outside, the storm did not let up. It only waited, the way something ancient waits when it already knows exactly how this ends, and has decided, for now, to let the players believe otherwise. The storm did not let up. It only waited. Evelyn's breath came fast and shallow, her arms still locked around the baby, her back pressed so hard against the headboard that the carved wood bit into her spine. She didn't feel it. All she felt was the king kneeling 3 feet away, watching her with an expression she couldn't read and didn't trust. "Please," she said again, quieter this time. "Please don't." Lucian didn't move. He was still trying to understand what he was looking at. The crimson eyes, the small fist curled into her dress, the 400 years of silence cracking open inside his own chest. When Evelyn's gaze sharpened on his face and something in her expression changed. Not confusion, recognition. "You," she whispered. Lucian went very still. "You know me. I know exactly who you are." Her voice shook, but it didn't waver. "I've known for months." That should not have been possible. Humans did not simply know the vampire king on sight. His face was a rumor, a shadow passed between frightened villages, never a certainty. And yet she said it the way someone says a fact they've been carrying so long it stopped hurting to speak. "How do you know my name?" Lucian asked. His voice had dropped into something low and dangerous, the register that had made stronger men confess to crimes they hadn't committed. Evelyn said nothing. He reached toward the baby again, not to threaten, only to see, to confirm what his own eyes had already told him, and she recoiled so violently she nearly fell off the far side of the bed, curling completely around the child, putting her spine between Lucian and the infant, like a wall she intended to die inside of. "Don't touch him. My king." Gareth's voice cut between them, low and firm, and for the second time that night the old guard placed himself where he had no right to be. This time between Lucian and the bed itself. "She's terrified. Give her room." Lucian's eyes flicked to him, crimson and furious. "You would tell me twice in one night how to stand in my own castle. I would tell you 100 times if it kept you from frightening her into silence," Gareth said. "You want answers. She won't give them to a man looming over her son with his hand outstretched." For a moment, the 3 of them held there. Lucian wanting answers, Evelyn wanting only to protect what was in her arms. Gareth standing exactly where the 2 collided, absorbing the pressure so neither had to break first. It was an old position for him. He had spent 4 centuries standing between kings and the consequences of their own tempers, and he had never once minded the cost of it. It was Lucian who finally stepped back. He looked at Evelyn again, really looked, past the bruises and the torn dress and the fear, and something in her face pulled at a memory he'd spent months trying to bury. Blonde hair, a woman who never lowered her eyes, not even to him, a forest chapel, half-collapsed ivy swallowing the stone. "Luke's." "You're her," he said, so quietly it barely disturbed the air. "The woman from the chapel road." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. 2 years ago, Lucian had left the castle disguised as an ordinary nobleman, chasing rumors of human hunters organizing along the northern border. He told no one what he truly was. It had been easier that way. Easier to be simply a tired, unnamed man walking a forest path than to be a king everyone either feared or wanted dead. He'd met her near the ruins of an old chapel. She hadn't bowed. She hadn't even seemed impressed. She had instead asked him why he looked like a man carrying a mountain on his back, and when he'd told her, carefully in pieces, the way you tell the truth to someone you don't yet trust, that immortality could feel like a punishment, she had said something no one had said to him in 3 centuries. That sounds lonely, not powerful, not terrifying, lonely. They had met again and again. She knew him only as Luke, a name with no crown attached to it, no throne, no 400 years of blood behind it. He'd told himself each time that this would be the last visit, that a king had no business slipping away into the trees to talk with a woman who owed him nothing and asked for even less. He'd never once meant it. For the first time since he could remember, Lucian had let himself be simply a man. Then the assassination attempt on his royal court had pulled him back to the capital in the middle of the night, and he had promised her he would return. He never had. "I thought you left me," Lucian said now, the words rougher than he intended. "I thought you disappeared because you decided a man with no name wasn't worth the trouble." Evelyn's eyes filled, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, the fear in them gave way to something closer to grief. "Why did you disappear?" he asked. She looked down at the child in her arms. Really looked, the way a person looks at something they bled to keep alive. And when she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because someone discovered what you and I had created." The room went silent. Lucian felt the words land somewhere he didn't have language for. He looked at the baby again, at the crimson eyes, at the small fist still curled tight into Evelyn's dress, and understood, fully, finally, exactly what he was looking at. The child began to cry, a thin, furious wail that cut through the storm outside. His fingers tightened further into the fabric of Evelyn's dress, as if some instinct in him already knew the room had turned dangerous. "Your enemies found out I was carrying your son," Evelyn said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "That's why I ran." Lucian opened his mouth. To say what? He didn't know yet. There weren't words built for this. But he never got the chance. Somewhere far above them, deep in the ancient stone of the castle, the bells began to ring. Not the bells that called servants to supper, or guards to change their watch. The bells that had not rung in over a century. The wards had been breached. The wards had been breached. For 3 full seconds, no one in the chamber moved. Then Gareth was already at the door, shouting orders down the corridor in a voice that carried through stone, like it had been built for exactly this moment. "Lock down! Every gate, every hall, every window below the 3rd floor. Now!" Boots thundered somewhere beyond the walls. Adrian was gone before Lucian even registered him leaving, already barking commands toward the western corridor, his calm silence replaced by something sharper, faster, honed by centuries of exactly this kind of night. Lucian rose to his feet, and for the first time since he'd pulled back that blanket, the king reasserted himself over the man. "Evelyn." His voice was steady now, stripped of everything but urgency. "You and the child need to be moved. There's a secure chamber below the east wing. Reinforced stone, warded on all sides. You'll be safe there." "No, Evelyn, no." She said it again, sharper, curling tighter around the baby as if the word alone might be enough to hold back an army. "I've spent 3 months running from people who wanted to take him from me. I'm not handing him to anyone, not even you." "No one will take him from you," Lucian said. "I swear it." Evelyn's eyes met his, and whatever softness had crept into her expression over the last several minutes vanished entirely. "That's what everyone says," she said, "before they try." The words landed harder than a blow. Lucian didn't answer, because there was nothing to say to a woman who had learned, the hard way, that promises from powerful men rarely survived contact with their own ambition. The bells kept ringing. Lucian forced himself to look past the urgency of the moment and study the child properly, really study him, the way he would study a weapon he didn't yet understand. The baby had stopped crying, but his small fists were still clenched, and something about the air around him felt charged, the way the atmosphere thickens before lightning finds ground. He could feel it, vampire blood, unmistakably his own, running through the child like an inheritance, and beneath it, human blood, warmer, softer, undeniably Evelyn's. But there was a third thing, something he had no name for, something that didn't belong to either bloodline. It moved through the boy like a current with no source. "What is he?" Lucian asked quietly. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice had gone hollow. "I don't know. Not fully. He senses things he shouldn't be able to. Fear, grief. He cried once in the village where I was hiding, and every candle in the house went out at the same moment. I told myself it was coincidence. It kept happening." Gareth had returned to the doorway, his expression grim in a way Lucian hadn't seen on the old guard in decades. "My king," he said, "there is something you need to hear, something I hoped I would never have cause to say aloud." Lucian turned. "Speak." Gareth hesitated, an old soldier weighing whether a truth was safe to release into the world. Then he spoke anyway. "There is a prophecy, known only to the oldest guards, passed down since before your father's reign. It speaks of a child born between night and dawn, vampire and human, blood joined against every law that has ever governed our kind." He glanced at the baby. "Some believe that child could end the war between our peoples, end it, or become the most dangerous being either side has ever produced." Silence settled over the room, broken only by the distant echo of boots and steel against stone, and somewhere beneath it, the low, ceaseless tolling of the bells. "There is no version of that prophecy," Gareth continued, "where the boy is permitted to grow up quietly." Lucian felt something cold settle behind his ribs, colder than anything the storm outside could account for. The royal council would see the child as a threat to their influence the moment they learned of him. Lord Malacourse, his own former advisor, a man Lucian had trusted with half the kingdom's secrets, commanded a faction that would want the boy dead before he ever took his first steps. And beyond the castle walls, human hunters would want Evelyn and the child erased entirely, proof, in their eyes, that humanity itself had grown vulnerable to vampire blood. Everyone wanted him gone. No one wanted him to simply exist. Lucian looked at Evelyn again, and this time the weight of the last several months settled fully onto him, not as suspicion, but as grief. He had spent months believing she abandoned him. He had let that belief curdle into something bitter, something he'd buried under centuries of practiced indifference. She had never abandoned him. She had been running for their son's life. "Why didn't you come back to me?" he asked, quieter now. "When you first knew, why didn't you come to the castle?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Because the first person who found me was carrying your royal seal." Lucian went still. "He said he'd been sent to protect me," she continued. "He wasn't. I only survived because I didn't trust him enough to let him get close." Her eyes hardened. "Someone in your own kingdom was hunting me before I ever set foot near this castle, Lucian." Something shifted behind Lucian's expression, not confusion this time, but a slow, dawning fury, the kind that had ended houses and unmade titles in centuries past. Someone close to the crown, someone with access to the seal itself, a traitor. Before he could speak, the chamber doors burst open. A royal guard staggered through, one hand pressed to a wound blooming dark across his chest, his armor scorched at the shoulder as though something unnatural had torn through it. He collapsed against the doorframe, and Gareth was at his side in an instant, catching him before he hit the floor. "Report," Lucian said, already moving. The guard's eyes found the king's, wide and desperate, blood gathering at the corner of his mouth. "The traitor," he managed, each word costing him more than the last. Already, inside, his hand closed weakly around Gareth's sleeve. Then his eyes went still, and he said nothing more. He said nothing more. Gareth lowered the dead guard to the floor with a care that looked almost tender, closing his eyes with 2 fingers before rising. His face had gone hard in a way Lucian rarely saw. Not grief, not yet. Fury, banked and patient. "Seal the castle," Lucian said. His voice had dropped to something quiet and absolute, the tone he reserved for wars. "No one enters. No one leaves. Search every corridor, every servant's passage, every stone that's ever hidden. A door, already moving, my king. Adrian appeared in the doorway, his blade unsheathed, his eyes flicking once to the dead guard before fixing on Lucian. I'll take the guards personally. If someone inside these walls let the enemy through, I'll find them. Question everyone, Lucian said. I don't care how long they've served this house. Adrian gave a single sharp nod and was gone. Gareth stayed. He crossed to stand near the bed, near Evelyn, a silent wall between her and whatever came through that door next. Lucian understood, distantly, that this was the second time tonight the old guard had positioned himself exactly there, and that he would keep doing it without being asked for as long as he had breath left. Lucian's fury had nowhere to go. It moved through him like heat, with no exit, because the enemy hadn't stumbled onto this chamber by chance. They had known which wing, which floor, which door. Knowledge that should have belonged to perhaps 4 people in the entire castle. They knew exactly where you were, he said, more to himself than to her. Evelyn's arms tightened around the baby. They always do. Something in the way she said it, flat, exhausted, entirely unsurprised, made Lucian finally sit, not as a king surveying a threat, but as a man forcing himself to listen. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Lucian thought she might refuse again. Then, slowly, the story came. At first, after he left for the capital, she had simply waited. She told herself he would return, that whatever pulled him away was urgent but temporary, that a man who spoke of loneliness the way he had wouldn't vanish without a word. Weeks passed, then months, and somewhere in her 5th month, carrying his child, strangers began appearing at the edges of her village. Men who asked too many questions about a woman who lived alone near the chapel road, who watched her house from the tree line at night. Then a royal messenger found her. He told her, gently, almost kindly, that the king had ordered her death, that a human carrying vampire blood was a liability the crown could not permit to live. He offered her mercy, a quiet death instead of a hunted one. And Evelyn had looked him in the eye and refused to believe a single word. I didn't believe you'd do that, she said now, looking at Lucian directly for the first time since the story started. Not for a second. But I couldn't prove it, and I couldn't risk being wrong. 3 nights later, her home was attacked. She had given birth only days earlier. She remembered almost nothing of the assault itself, only fragments. Men breaking through the door, the baby's thin cry cutting through the chaos. Her own hands, still weak from labor, wrapping her son beneath her cloak as she went out through a passage hidden behind the hearth. A passage she'd found by accident months before, and thanked whatever god was listening that she had. She ran through the forest for hours. She was struck twice, once across the face, once hard enough to nearly take her down, and she remembered thinking, with a clarity that still frightened her, that she would rather die running than be caught standing still. She would have died that night. She said it plainly, without asking for pity, if Gareth hadn't found her. The old guard's jaw tightened at the memory. I saw the mark on her shoulder before I saw her face, he admitted quietly. The crescent. I knew it. It belongs to a bloodline older than this castle, a family I believed extinct. He looked at Lucian. I didn't bring her here only to save her life, my king. I brought her here because I believed you needed to know what she was carrying. Lucian absorbed this in silence, and something inside him that had been rigid for months finally gave way. His greatest mistake, he understood now, hadn't been losing her. It had been believing, without once questioning it, that she had simply chosen to leave. I'm sorry, he said, and the words felt foreign in his mouth, unpracticed, 400 years overdue. I should have gone back for you. I should never have assumed. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was steady, unforgiving, and entirely honest. You were a king before you were a man, she said. I needed the man. The words landed somewhere no blade ever had. Lucian sat with that for a long moment, then made himself say the only thing he had left. I won't command you. Not tonight, not after this. Tell me what you need. Evelyn looked down at their son, at the small fist still curled tight into her sleeve. I need you to keep our son alive. Then that is what I will do." The words had barely left him when Adrian returned, moving fast, something clutched in his hand. His face had gone pale in a way Lucian had never seen on him. "My king," he said, "you need to see this." He held out a single sheet of parchment, sealed with royal wax that had already been broken. Lucian took it, and as his eyes moved across the words, his blood went cold. An execution order. Evelyn's name. His own seal pressed into the wax. He had never signed it, and the date at the bottom of the page was written months before Evelyn had ever disappeared. The date at the bottom of the page was written months before Evelyn had ever disappeared. Lucian read it 3 times, as though repetition might change what was written there. It didn't. The ink held steady, the seal held steady, and the truth held steady with it. Someone inside his own castle had ordered Evelyn's death before she had even run, before she had even known she needed to. "Who had access to your seal before that date?" Adrian asked quietly. "Too many people," Lucian said, and hated how true it was. Gareth had gone very still, staring at the parchment over Lucian's shoulder, and something in his expression shifted from fury into something closer to recognition. He looked at Evelyn, not at her face this time, but lower, toward the torn shoulder of her dress, where the edge of an old, faded mark was just visible beneath the fabric. "May I?" he asked her, and there was a gentleness in the question. Lucian rarely heard from him. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded, pulling the fabric aside enough to reveal the birthmark fully, a pale crescent, curved and deliberate, unlike anything nature drew by accident. Gareth exhaled slowly. "I hoped I was wrong." "Wrong about what?" Lucian asked. "About what she is." Gareth straightened, and when he spoke again, it was with the weight of a man finally setting down something he'd carried a long time. "That mark isn't a birthmark, my king. It's a symbol. It belongs to an order older than this castle, older than your bloodline. They called themselves the Keepers of Dawn." Evelyn's brow furrowed. "I've never heard that name in my life." "You wouldn't have," Gareth said. "They were never hunters. They didn't kill vampires, and they didn't serve humans blindly either. Their purpose was balance, preventing either side from tipping the world toward ruin. They watched bloodlines, guarded them, vanished when they needed to, and reappeared when the world required it." He looked at her steadily. "Your family were keepers, Evelyn, which means your parents didn't die when you were a child." The room went very quiet. "They're dead," Evelyn said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "I was told—" "You were told what kept you alive," Gareth said. "The Royal Council once moved against the Keepers generations ago, when they grew afraid of an order that answered to no crown. Your parents likely discovered the threat and did the only thing that would protect you. They disappeared, and they let you believe they were gone, so no one hunting them would think to look for their daughter." Evelyn's arms tightened around the sleeping child, her face pale, working through decades of grief being quietly, impossibly rewritten. Lucian felt something shift in his own chest as the pieces began arranging themselves into a shape he hadn't expected. "There was an agreement," he said slowly, memories surfacing from something he'd read as a boy, half forgotten in the vaults beneath the throne room. "Between my ancestors and the Keepers, I thought it was myth." Gareth nodded grimly. "It was real. The agreement stated that if a child were ever born of the royal vampire bloodline and a true Keeper of Dawn, that child would carry the power to unite supernatural and human magic, not divide it, not destroy it, unite it." Lucian looked down at his son, understanding landing on him slowly, then all at once. Evelyn was not simply the woman he'd loved in secret near a forest chapel. She was descended from the one human bloodline capable of reshaping vampire society itself, and their son was not merely an heir with dangerous blood. He was the bridge the prophecy had been describing all along. "That's why he reacted to me," Lucian murmured. "Why the wards respond when he cries. He isn't simply powerful. He's exactly what he was always meant to become." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, and then something in her expression changed. A memory surfacing, urgent and unresolved. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said. "Before I reached the castle, someone left a message for me. I found it tucked into my cloak the night I was running, and I assumed it came from whoever was hunting me. A threat, or a trap." "What did it say?" Lucian asked. Evelyn's voice dropped. "When the king discovers the child, he will finally understand why we disappeared. Gareth's head turned sharply. "Show me." Evelyn reached into the torn fold of her dress and withdrew a small, folded scrap of parchment, worn soft from being carried too long. Gareth took it carefully, studying the handwriting, and his expression changed in a way that made Lucian's pulse quicken. "I know this hand," Gareth said quietly. "I would know it anywhere. It belongs to your father, Evelyn." Evelyn stared at him. "That's impossible. He's been dead for 20 years. So were the keepers," Gareth said. "Until tonight." The words hung in the room, heavy with implication. Neither of them had time to fully absorb, because at that exact moment, glass exploded somewhere above them. Everyone turned. A raven, black and enormous, crashed through the narrow window of the chamber in a spray of broken glass and rain, wings beating wildly against the stone before it landed hard on the floor near the bed. Adrian moved instantly, blade drawn, but the bird made no move to attack. It simply lay there, chest heaving, a small scroll bound tightly to its leg. Lucian crossed the room and knelt beside it. The raven didn't resist as he carefully untied the scroll, its dark eyes fixed on him with something almost like intention. He unrolled the parchment. 6 words, written in the same steady hand Gareth had just identified. "Your son is not your only heir." Lucian read the words twice, and the chamber, already thick with revelation, went utterly silent around him. The chamber, already thick with revelation, went utterly silent around him. It didn't stay silent long. Voices rose from beyond the doors. Many voices, sharp with authority, moving fast down the corridor. Gareth's hand went to his blade before the doors had even opened. "The council," he said grimly. "They've heard." The doors swung wide, and the royal council entered like a verdict already decided. 6 nobles, robed in black and silver, faces old enough to remember wars. Lucian himself had fought as a young king. At their head walked Lord Malak, composed, unhurried, his expression arranged into something that looked almost like concern. "Your Majesty." Malak's voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who had spent decades making himself indispensable. "We came the moment we heard the wards had been breached, and now we hear something far more troubling." His eyes moved to the bed, to Evelyn, to the child in her arms. "A human woman, in your private chambers, holding a child that carries our king's blood." One of the nobles stepped forward, his voice cold. "This cannot be permitted to continue unmonitored. The child must be placed under the council's protection. For the kingdom's safety, no one touches my son." The words came out of Lucian before he'd fully decided to say them, and they landed with a weight that silenced the room. It was the first time, in 4 centuries, that Lucian Draven had acknowledged anything as his. In front of the full council, the nobles exchanged glances. Malrek's expression didn't change at all. "Understandable," Malrek said gently. "A father's instinct. But your Majesty, I fear you may not be seeing this clearly." He produced a folded document from beneath his robe, offering it forward like a gift. "We've uncovered correspondence suggesting this woman has been in contact with human hunters for months, that she may have orchestrated tonight's breach herself, to gain entry to this castle under the guise of a victim." Lucian took the document, his eyes moved across it, and for one unbearable second, doubt flickered behind his expression. Evelyn saw it. "You believe him," she said, and her voice cracked on the words, not with anger, but with something worse. The quiet devastation of watching trust collapse exactly the way she'd feared it would. "After everything I told you tonight, after everything I survived." "I don't," Lucian started. "You hesitated," she said. "That's enough." It was Gareth who moved first, taking the document from Lucian's hand and studying it with narrowed eyes. He turned it toward the candlelight, comparing it silently to the execution order still resting on the table. "The seal," he said slowly. "Look at the seal." Lucian looked. It took him a moment to see what Gareth had already found. The crest was reversed, the raven facing left instead of right. A detail so small it would escape anyone who hadn't spent 4 centuries staring at that exact seal pressed into wax. "This wasn't stamped with the royal seal," Gareth said. "It was stamped with a copy, and a copy this precise could only be made by someone who has held the true seal in their hands." His eyes lifted, slow and deliberate, toward Malric, someone with access to the king's private chambers. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Malric's calm didn't waver, but something behind his eyes shifted, recalculating. Adrian stepped forward before Malric could speak, another set of parchments in his hand, his face grim. "My king, I searched Malric's chambers while the council gathered. I found these hidden behind a false panel." He held them out. Correspondence between Lord Malric and known human hunters dating back over a year. He didn't just know about the attacks against Evelyn. Adrian's jaw tightened. He ordered them. The room turned toward Malric as one. For a long moment, Malric said nothing at all. Then, slowly, he smiled. And it was not the smile of a man caught. It was the smile of a man who had already planned for this exact moment. "Clever," he said softly. "Truly. I underestimated the old guard." He reached into his sleeve and withdrew something small, a shard of black stone, etched with symbols older than the castle itself. "But you've made one mistake tonight, Your Majesty. You brought me into a room built on wards I helped design." He crushed the stone in his fist. The chamber. Every guard along the corridor collapsed at once, as though the strength had simply been pulled out of their legs. The candles guttered violently, and the ancient protective symbols carved into the chamber walls, symbols meant to shield the king from every enemy in existence, flared crimson and turned, impossibly, against him. "I don't want the child dead," Malric said, his voice carrying easily over the chaos. "I never did. Dead. He's useless to me. Alive. And under my guidance, he could reshape everything this kingdom has ever been." He moved faster than anyone in the room could react. By the time Lucian lunged forward, Malric already had the baby in his arms, torn from Evelyn's grip in a single motion too quick to stop. Evelyn screamed. Lucian's vision went entirely, completely crimson. The stone floor beneath him cracked. The candles along the walls snapped out all at once, plunging the chamber into darkness, lit only by the storm outside and the terrible red light bleeding from Lucian's eyes. "Give me my son," he said, and his voice no longer sounded entirely human. Malric only smiled wider, stepping back toward the shattered window, the baby held with careful, deliberate gentleness against his chest. "Come and take him," he said. "Your Majesty." "Come and take him," he said. "Your Majesty." Malric was gone before the last word finished leaving his mouth, vanishing through the shattered window into the dark corridor beyond, and Lucian didn't wait to think. He moved. The wards that had turned against him tore at the air as he passed, crimson light crawling along the walls like something alive and furious. But Lucian didn't slow. He hit the corridor at a speed no mortal eye could have tracked, stone cracking beneath his feet with every stride. Lucian, Gareth, was already moving, sword drawn, shouting over his shoulder. The lower vaults. The old ritual chamber beneath the throne room. If he means to use the boy's blood for anything, that's where he'll take him. "How do you know that?" Adrian called, falling into step beside him. "Because that's where I would take him," Gareth said grimly. "If I were the kind of man Malric is." Evelyn was already running, faster than her exhausted body should have allowed, one hand pressed flat against her own shoulder, against the crescent mark burning beneath her torn dress like a brand. "This way," she said. Adrian shot her a look. "You can't possibly know. I can feel him." Her voice cracked, but her feet didn't slow. "I can feel where he is, like a thread pulling behind my ribs. It wasn't there an hour ago. It's there now." She turned down a corridor none of them had directed her toward, and after only a heartbeat's hesitation, Gareth followed. "The bloodline," he murmured, understanding dawning even as he ran. "It's waking in her." They descended through the castle in a formation that had no need of words. Lucian led with raw, unstoppable force, tearing through anything that stood between them and the stairwell. Corrupted wards, collapsed passages, two of Malric's men who made the mistake of standing their ground. Gareth moved beside him, calling directions, reading the castle's bones better than any map could. Adrian moved like a shadow at their flank, silent, precise, cutting down threats before they fully registered as threats at all. And Evelyn ran at the center of them, guided by nothing but the pole beneath her skin, refusing every instinct that told her to fall back and let the fighters fight. The stairwell to the lower vaults hadn't been used in a generation. Dust and cobwebs gave way to something colder. The deeper they went, an old, patient chill that had nothing to do with stone or season. They found the ritual chamber at the bottom. It opened into a wide, circular vault, carved directly from the mountain the castle had been built into, its walls etched floor to ceiling with symbols that predated the kingdom itself. Black candles burned in a perfect ring at the center of the room, and inside that ring, resting on a stone dais surrounded by lines of ancient script, lay the baby. He wasn't crying. He simply watched the ceiling with wide, unblinking crimson eyes, as if he understood, in some way none of them could, exactly what was happening around him. Malrake stood over the circle, a blade in one hand, an old iron bowl in the other. "You made good time," he said without turning, "faster than I expected. It's almost admirable." "Step away from him," Lucian said, and the chamber itself seemed to shudder at the sound of his voice. "You still don't understand what's at stake." Malrake finally turned, unhurried, calm in the way of a man who had already accepted every possible outcome. "The prophecy was never a gift, Your Majesty. Night and dawn joined together. Everyone assumed that meant peace, union, a bridge between our worlds." He shook his head slowly. "It doesn't mean peace. It means judgment. When war comes between humans and vampires, and it will come, it has always been coming, this child will be the one who decides which side survives it." "That's not your decision to make," Gareth said. "No," Malak agreed, "which is exactly why it needs to be mine." His eyes moved to the baby, almost reverent. A child left to grow up soft, sentimental, torn between two bloodlines, with divided loyalty. That child destroys us all. But a child raised correctly, guided from birth to understand exactly what he is and exactly what our kind requires of him. That child saves this kingdom. I am not his enemy. I am the only one in this room willing to do what's necessary. "You're a murderer," Evelyn said, stepping forward before anyone could stop her. Malrake's gaze finally settled on her, and something in his expression shifted into open contempt. "You are a human girl who happened to catch a king's eye for one season. You are not part of this conversation. I am his mother. You are insignificant," Malak said flatly, "compared to what vampire royalty requires. You should be grateful I haven't already ended you. Your usefulness expired the moment you gave birth." Evelyn didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the ring of black candles, close enough that Lucian's breath caught in his throat. "You spent months hunting a frightened woman," she said, her voice low and steady in a way it hadn't been all night. "You sent men into my home. You beat me on a forest road while I carried a baby beneath my cloak. You've had 100 chances to kill me, and every single time I survived anyway." She stepped over the line of candles, directly into the circle. Malark's composure cracked for the first time. "Get back. You should have remembered," Evelyn said, "what frightened mothers become when someone touches their child." She reached down and lifted her son off the stone dais, holding him against her chest, exactly the way she had for 3 months of running, of hiding, of surviving alone with no crown and no army to protect her, only her own body standing between her son and everyone who wanted him. Something in Lucian broke open completely. He had spent the entire night believing that being king meant commanding, protecting through force, through fear, through 4 centuries of power no one dared challenge. Watching Evelyn step into that circle without hesitation, without waiting for permission, without needing him to save her, he understood, finally and completely, that none of his power had ever been what kept his son alive. She had done that, alone, for months. Being king meant nothing if he couldn't protect the people he loved. Lucian moved. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need one. He drove his open palm into the nearest black candle, and the moment the flame died, the entire ritual circle shattered, symbols cracking apart across the stone floor, the cold, ancient magic that had held the chamber in its grip, collapsing all at once like a held breath, finally released. Malak staggered back, the bowl falling from his hand, shattering against the floor. "No," he started. He never finished. The baby, still cradled against Evelyn's chest, open his eyes fully for the first time since they'd entered the chamber. The crimson in them deepened, spreading like ink through water, and a pulse of pure, ancient energy rolled outward from the child in a single silent wave. Every vampire in the room, Malrek, the guards still standing at the chamber's edge, even Adrian, even Gareth, dropped to their knees at once. An instinct older than memory pulling them down before conscious thought could stop it. Lucian alone remained standing, staring at his son in stunned, breathless silence. The child's small hand lifted, reaching toward him, and in a voice too clear, too certain for something so newly born into the world, he spoke his very first word. "Father, Father." The word had barely left the child's mouth when he began to cry. Not the thin, frightened wail of an ordinary infant, but something deeper, something that rolled outward from him in a visible wave, rattling the ancient script carved into the chamber walls. The kneeling vampires flinched as it passed over them. Somewhere far above, Lucian felt the castle's entire network of wards shudder at once. 1,000 years of protective magic bending under the pulse of a child not yet a day old. He wasn't the only one who felt it. Miles beyond the mountains, in cold camps and hidden villages, human hunters who had spent their lives sensing vampire movement the way sailors sense a coming storm went suddenly, uniformly still. Something ancient had woken, something the old stories had warned them about, and the newer generations had stopped believing in. Both worlds understood, in that same instant, that the prophecy was no longer a rumor. It had begun. Malrek was the first to move. He came at Evelyn with a speed that belied his age. A blade materializing from his sleeve, murder plain on his face for the first time all night. No more performance, no more careful diplomacy. If the child could not be controlled, Malrek's expression said clearly, then the mother would be removed from the equation entirely. Lucian was faster. He intercepted the blade an inch from Evelyn's throat, driving Malrek backward through the chamber with a force that cracked stone beneath both their feet. The fight that followed tore through the ritual vault and up the narrow stairwell into the throne room above, two ancient vampires moving faster than mortal eyes could follow. Blades and fists and raw supernatural force colliding in the dark. Lucian fought the way legend said he fought, the way that had built his 400-year reputation, the reason villages went silent at his name. But this was different from every battle before it, and some part of him knew it even as his fists found Malrek's ribs, even as he slammed the traitor through a marble column that had stood since before either of them was born. He wasn't fighting for pride tonight. He wasn't fighting for vengeance or territory or the cold satisfaction of proving no one crossed him and lived. He was fighting for his son, for Evelyn, for the family he hadn't known, he had until an hour ago and already couldn't imagine losing. Malrek staggered upright, blood at his mouth, and drove forward with everything he had left, forcing Lucian back toward the throne itself. "You can't win this without becoming exactly what they fear," he snarled. "Kill me, and you prove the council right. A king who rules through violence, whose bloodline is exactly as dangerous as they always suspected." Evelyn, following behind with the baby held tight against her chest, understood the trap a half-second before Lucian did. If he killed Malor here, in front of the gathering court, he would fulfill the prophecy's darkest reading with his own hands. Proof that the child born between night and dawn had made his father into precisely the monster everyone feared. "Lucian," he turned, blade still raised, Malek pinned beneath him against the throne room floor. "Don't become the monster they expect you to be," Evelyn said, stepping closer, her voice steady despite the chaos still ringing through the walls. "He wants you angry. He wants the court to watch you kill in cold blood. Our son doesn't need a king who rules through fear." She looked down at the baby, then back up at Lucian. "He needs parents who choose something better." Lucian's hand shook around the blade. Malek, sensing hesitation, smiled through bloodied teeth. "Good," he whispered. "Mercy, how weak." Slowly Lucian lowered the weapon. Malek's smile widened, already reaching for something else hidden in his sleeve, until the baby, still cradled in Evelyn's arms, reached one small hand toward him. The chamber filled with light. Images tore through the air above Malrek's head, visible to every gathered noble at once. The forged seal, the execution order, the letters to human hunters, the attacks on Evelyn's home, every hidden crime Malik had spent months carefully burying, now laid bare in front of the entire royal court. The nobles who had followed him for decades watched, in horrified silence, as their own trusted advisor was revealed for exactly what he was. One by one, they stepped back from him. His alliances, built over years of careful manipulation, dissolved in the span of a single minute. Lucian looked down at the man who had hunted his family for months, who had nearly cost him everything, and felt the old instinct rise. The 400-year habit of ending threats permanently. He didn't act on it. Take him to the lower cells, Lucian said instead. Strip him of his title. He answers for this before the full council. With a trial, not an execution. Gareth, bloodied but steady, nodded once and moved to see it done. It was, Lucian understood as the guards dragged Malrek away, the first time in his reign he had chosen justice over vengeance. And somehow, it felt stronger than every act of violence that had come before it. The throne room slowly emptied of nobles, of guards, of the last echoes of the battle, until only Lucian, Evelyn, and their son remained beneath the cracked stained glass. A figure stepped from the shadows near the broken window, an older man, weathered, his eyes achingly familiar. Evelyn went still. Father. He crossed the room slowly, as though afraid she might vanish if he moved too fast, and looked between his daughter and the sleeping child in her arms. I've been watching over this castle longer than you know, he said quietly. To Lucian, he added, the prophecy was never about your son becoming king. Lucian frowned. Then what was it about? Evelyn's father looked at her, not at the baby, not at the crown, but at his daughter, and smiled for the first time. It was about the king finally learning how to love. It was about the king finally learning how to love. The words settled over the throne room like the last note of a song no one had realized they were listening for. By morning, the storm had finally broken. Sunlight filtered weakly through the shattered stained glass, scattering fractured color across floors littered with broken candle wax, and the debris of a battle that had nearly cost them everything. Servants moved quietly through the halls, sweeping glass, righting overturned furniture, careful not to look too directly at the private chamber where the king had not yet emerged. The kingdom waited. For 400 years, Lucian Draven had made every decision behind closed doors. Revealed only once, the outcome was already settled. This time he walked into the great hall himself, his son cradled in his arms, Evelyn beside him with her chin lifted despite the exhaustion still etched into her face. The court fell silent. This is my son, Lucian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall without needing to be raised. Born of my blood and the blood of Evelyn of the Keepers of Dawn, who is his mother, and who stands beside me now not as a prisoner, not as a secret, but as part of this house. His eyes moved slowly across the gathered nobles, daring any of them to object. Anyone who threatens either of them threatens me. No one spoke. For the first time in the castle's long history, the Vampire King had chosen to be seen. Gareth raised the question everyone had been too careful to ask. You could return to the human world, he told Evelyn gently. The king would see you safely settled, protected, far from all of this if that's what you wanted. Evelyn looked down at her sleeping son, then at Lucian, standing near the window where morning light was beginning to touch the edges of the broken glass. I don't need to go back, she said. I spent my whole life believing my family was gone, believing I was alone in the world. Her voice caught, but she kept going. I'm not alone anymore. I'm not leaving that. Lucian stepped closer. Are you certain? Evelyn smiled through tears that had been building since the moment the court fell silent for her. For the first time in my life, Lucian stood beside the enormous velvet bed, watching his son sleep in Evelyn's arms, and felt something inside him finally give way completely. He had spent 4 centuries believing that love was the one weakness immortality couldn't afford, that everything he cared for would eventually be taken, and that the only way to survive that loss was to never let himself care at all. He understood now how wrong that had been. Love wasn't the thing immortality couldn't survive. It was the only thing that had ever given his immortality a reason to continue. He reached down and took his son's tiny hand between 2 fingers. The baby's fist closed instinctively around him, small and impossibly strong, and Lucian felt his throat tighten in a way he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. The tears came quietly, not dramatically, not with the violence of grief he'd buried for centuries, just a slow, steady release, running down a face that had not allowed itself to feel anything at all in longer than most kingdoms had existed. Gareth turned away, giving the king the privacy such a moment deserved. Adrian lowered his head without a word. The most feared ruler in the supernatural world had finally allowed himself to feel. In the days that followed, Lucian began undoing centuries of law. Humans crossing into vampire territory would no longer be treated as enemies by default. The royal council was dissolved and rebuilt, its seats no longer inherited through fear, but earned through service the kingdom could trust. An invitation was sent beyond the mountains, extended to the Keepers of Dawn, the first formal contact between the two orders in generations. Gareth was named guardian of the young prince, a role he accepted with more emotion than he allowed himself to show. Adrian remained a silent shadow at Lucian's side, unwavering as ever. Evelyn found Lucian standing at the window as dawn continued to break, watching the light spread slowly across the mountains beyond the castle. "Do you regret the centuries before us?" she asked quietly. Lucian was silent for a long moment. "I regret believing I had nothing left to lose." He turned to face her fully. "I was wrong." He knelt beside her and their son, and for the first time in 400 years, he was not kneeling as a king surveying a threat, or a ruler accepting tribute. He was kneeling as a father. It was in that stillness that Evelyn's father spoke again, stepping forward from where he'd remained quietly near the doorway. "There is one more thing you should know," he said, "about your son." Lucian looked up. "His eyes are not the only thing that sets him apart," the older man said. "There is an old fear among the keepers, older than the prophecy itself. A child born of both bloodlines, fully realized, might not carry the weakness of either one." As if summoned by the words themselves, the first true ray of morning sunlight broke through the shattered stained glass window, cutting a clean line of gold across the stone floor. It crept slowly forward, climbing the edge of the bed, until it touched the baby's small outstretched hand. Everyone in the room went still. No burn, no smoke, no cry of pain. Only a small, contented sigh as the child's fingers curled in the warmth. Lucian stared, disbelief plain on his face. "That's not possible." Gareth's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. The prophecy was never about choosing between night and dawn. Evelyn looked down at her son, sunlight spilling gently across his sleeping face, and understood before Gareth even finished. "He is both," Gareth said. Sunlight filled the once dark throne room, chasing shadows from corners that had held darkness for 4 centuries. Lucian knelt with his son in his arms and Evelyn beside him, and understood, finally, exactly what he had spent the night fighting to protect. Not a throne, not a kingdom, a family, and somewhere far beyond the mountains. In places older than the castle and colder than the grave, ancient things that had slept through centuries of quiet stirred awake at the news. The impossible heir had been born.